afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Shaw. I'm the project manager for the Vicksburg District. We'd like to welcome you all here to this second public meeting for the Pearl River Flood Risk Management Project. We greatly appreciate you coming. We are here for a couple of reasons. One is to help provide information to you, but most importantly, we want to gain input and feedback from you about the project. So we do thank you for being here. And so I want to go ahead and recognize our guests on the panel today. We've got Robin Colosimo on your far right. She is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Project Planning and Policy Review. Next to her, we've got Colonel Christopher Klein, the Vicksburg District Commander for the Corps of Engineers. And then next to the Colonel is Leslie Prokaska. She is the plan formulator with the Regional Planning, Environment, and Division South. And so they will be helping, if you will, to make this presentation. And then there'll be a period of time afterwards we'll be looking for comments and feedback from you. So, if you will, I want to kind of do a couple of housekeeping things. We've got basically a 2-hour window to conduct this session and get some feedback from you. When you came in, there was some sign-up sheets. We would ask that you please, if you're comfortable doing so, please sign up, list your address, maybe a phone number. I wouldn't necessarily put your personal email because it will become part of the record, and I would hate for you to receive some unsolicited emails about that. So at this time I want to talk about a couple of things. One is, you notice there are multiple boards out in the foyer when we came in, and on those there are the rules of engagement. There's the discussions about the public meetings, which you will see on the slideshow. But there's also the study area and what constitutes alternate A, which is a non-structural alternate as proposed by the non-federal interest, and an alternate C, which is their locally preferred plan. So we do have a virtual presence as well. It's not only face-to-face here. And so let me go over a couple of really quick things, if you will, with respect to feedback. So I would just ask that, if you're here in the audience and you want to ask a question at the end, that you would wait to be recognized, if you will, and then try to limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. There will be, as I mentioned, there's virtual WebEx going on as well. In that WebEx, you have the ability to chat and ask questions. We don't necessarily have a sign up on the WebEx, so if you would just enter in the chat your information, and that way we'll have a record of you having participated. So with that, let's go ahead and get going. We already talked about, okay, so agenda and purpose. We're here, like we said, we want to give you the opportunity to hear about the project and to provide us feedback. It's vitally important to us. The other thing is we want to recognize the non-federal interest, and that would be the Rankin-Hines, Pearl River Flood and Drainage Control District. The authorizations, this project was done as submitted under Section 3104, which allows the Secretary of the Army to take action upon this submission. And then there is, we'll talk a little bit later about Section 1176, which is the assessment of the downstream impacts. And so we'll be some discussions, if you will, about the history of the project and how we got to where we are today. The non-federal interest submitted a report under Section 211 in July of 22, and the ASA made comments, and the Vicksburg District, the reason we're here today is the Vicksburg District was charged by the ASA to fill in the gaps in those comments as we move forward. So we'll also talk about the review process. But with that, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, and so as I mentioned earlier, this is the second of 2 meetings here in Slidell. Tomorrow we will conduct meetings in Jackson, Mississippi, and you can see the schedules will still be a 1 and 6 p.m. Arrangement. And it will be at the Mississippi Ag Museum there on Lakeland Drive. A couple of important things there is the input that we're getting from you. When you came in, there are comment cards and a comment box that you can enter in your comments and basically place those in the box. There is an email that you'll see a little bit later, but the email's at the very bottom. I don't know if you can read that. And then, of course, we can still get hard copy U.S. mail. And so any of those will do in terms of us collecting information. The big thing is that we want your feedback. So, all right, and at this time, we're going to turn it over to Ms. Colosimo for her to talk about the importance of the project.
Quick mic check. Can you hear me? Bonus. Thanks everybody for taking the time to join us tonight. We did have a session earlier today, and it's good to see a few of you back here as well, but also just to see new faces. This is a really important beginning of a conversation around a potential project to deal with flood risk management in Jackson. And we're going to unpack what we know today and where we are through the 3 of us here, and then take questions, and so I look forward to all of that engagement. Overarchingly, yeah, I'm Robin Colosimo. I oversee the Corps of Engineers. I work in that office that oversees it, and my job sounds funky, right? Project planning and review. What's that mean? It's really about any proposal that comes through the Corps of Engineers for an investment in a community has to be cleared through our office before it goes to Congress, ultimately for project authorization or permission, and ultimately with the administration as well. So that is one of the reasons we're here. This is an important priority, and I'll come back to that. But I want to turn now to a video. Our leader in the office is Mr. Michael Connor. He is the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. He is the overseer of the Corps of Engineers, and he has some remarks because he could not be here today.
Hi everyone, I'm Mike Connor, Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. I provide policy oversight and direction for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Civil Works program. Thank you for joining us at this community engagement session on solutions to address flooding along the Pearl River in Mississippi. We look forward to hearing from you about your needs and concerns regarding flooding issues and a proposed project to address these challenges. As all of you know, the city of Jackson, Mississippi has experienced devastating floods as recently as 2020 and 2022. I saw firsthand some of this flooding in August of last year in a visit to discuss a proposed project. It is a priority to provide people of Jackson with effective near-term solutions to their flood risks, and we have a tremendous opportunity to deliver these solutions through the bipartisan infrastructure law and funding provided through that mechanism. This administration has set aside sufficient funding to complete planning and implementation of a plan consistent with existing authorities and in compliance with federal environmental laws. Your input today and the final technical report from this effort will inform my decision on the solutions we will implement to reduce flood risk in Jackson. I appreciate your time and input today as we work together to find the best solutions for the Pearl River, Jackson, and this region of Mississippi. Thank you very much for your time.
Couple key takeaways from that video from my boss is that, really it's his decision that ultimately you're going to help inform, and Congress gave him that authority in a number of places. And I'll come back to that in a few minutes. Mr. Connor is just a great person to be working for many reasons, but in places like this, really challenging water resources problems, his vast experience is particularly important in decision making. He's held many positions in the federal government and worked on the Hill, and most recently was the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Interior. So he has seen the government work across the water space, and we appreciate his views and ability to walk through this process with all of you. Next slide. Great. So why are we here? Really, in totality, we want to start this engagement with you all about advancing a flood risk management solution after decades of repetitive flooding in Jackson. For over 100 years, headwater flooding in the Pearl River has caused disruption to businesses and industry and residents. More than 5,000 commercial and residential structures have been damaged, impacting a population of more than 500,000. Notable events were in 79 and 83, and more recently 20 and 22. 1979 flood closed transportation routes, homes, and businesses. It also caused $223 million in damages back in 1979 values, so you can imagine what those would be today. The highest crest was in 2020 and notably impacting 2 minority and low-income areas of Jackson in particular. At the 22 event, which I was here with Mr. Connor for, we were actually visiting the area to understand what was happening in the Pearl and the opportunity to do something under Mr. Connor's leadership. It was actually starting to rain as we left, and so that's why he referenced that he was here. It was fascinating to have been here and tour the area and get an appreciation for it, and then know the rain started to come and what happened. It heightened the need to do something here. Of course, the Pearl River Basin also has tremendous environmental value, including wetlands that filter waters that eventually flow into the Gulf of Mexico and that support thousands of geese, ducks, and migratory birds. We all look forward to working with the interested parties like you to solve the flood risk management problems that have long plagued the communities in the Pearl River drainage. Next slide, please. In terms of federal interest, I think about it very simply, and it's here. In 1986, Congress authorized the Corps to plan, design, and implement a flood risk management project. Essentially, that meant we had the authority, through the Corps of Engineers, to go study the problem and develop potential solutions to flood risk management. In 2007, that authority was modified to allow the ASACW, Mr. Connor, to determine the appropriate plan to implement without further consultation by Congress. This is a pretty big deal. Typically, after a study is done, you have to go back to Congress to have them authorize it. This signaled Congress's continuing intent to resolve flood risk management in Jackson and throughout the Pearl drainage. In 2018, we also got specific direction to include analysis of potential downstream impacts. Mr. Shaw referenced that earlier. And that was perhaps from many of you, that we were hearing there were concerns about any unintended consequences of any investment in Pearl. And so those are things that are the basics for the foundations of the law and direction to our office and by extension the Corps of Engineers to solve something in Jackson and the flooding. Continuing interest for years, but there was no plan or funding to support moving out, and that's why we still end up in this situation years later that there is no viable solution that's been put forward. So why now? What's different? We have a tremendous opportunity because of the bipartisan infrastructure law, where funding was actually allocated to the Corps to identify, design, and ultimately implement a flood risk management project subject to the approval of Mr. Connor. What we are seeking to do, with your help, is to formulate and advance a solution that can happen, and quickly. So the big thing here is it's different because we now have funding allocated by Congress to allow something to move forward. So the process we're going to walk through and we're beginning through today ultimately leads to a decision which quickly allows design and construction to happen because we have those funds already allocated. Of course, in all of this process, we're going to comply with process and procedure, including environmental laws and all requirements. We are excited to be reinvigorating the technical and community work to deliver for Jackson. Many of you have experiences we heard from earlier today, and I look forward to hearing more about the additional folks that are here today. Big picture, this is the beginning of an important process, and we're looking forward to advancing it, beginning with your input. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Colonel Klein to walk through some additional information.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Colonel Chris Klein, Commander of the Vicksburg District. The Pearl River watershed is one of 9 watersheds that we oversee from up in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Honored to be here tonight, and thank you for taking the time to come out and provide us your feedback. We had a really good first session. Where we heard about the aging infrastructure on the river, silting concerns, erosion concerns from the banks. Greatly appreciate hearing about that. Also heard about the downstream impacts of whatever project we put in place, whether it be flooding or even the drying up of the river. You know, both of those concerns were expressed. Greatly appreciate that. Hope to hear more about that as well as habitat impacts. And so we heard about concerns about this is a very rich ecosystem, a lot of critical habitat for endangered and threatened species, and so we want to keep taking that into account. The other key takeaway I think I took from the first session was the desire and potential support for having a comprehensive Pearl River watershed study. That's not the purpose of this particular project, but it is something to be considered, and we greatly appreciate the feedback on that. It's really because the Pearl River's got a long history, started with navigation, now it's also flood risk management. And the story of the flood control, particularly up in Jackson, included those initial levee structures which were constructed in 1968. The flood of record occurred in 1979. Real devastating flood, plenty of pictures to prove it. And that resulted in the authorities to execute a flood control project for the city of Jackson. And since then, there have been multiple, both locally proposed as well as USACE proposed solutions for flood risk management in the Jackson area. So the latest locally presented plan was prepared under Section 211 of the Water Resources Development Act. And that allowed the locals to put together a plan, a reviewed plan, and then present it directly to the Secretary for consideration. And that's really what brings us to our work that we're doing today. So go to the next slide, please. So our USACE activities for today and our latest efforts started at the end of last year, 2022, at the direction of the Secretary. And our mission is to build off of all previous work, not all previous work that's been presented to us, and develop a report that assesses all options that are technically feasible, environmentally acceptable, and legally compliant. All right, so we're taking a look at all options in order to provide that flood risk mitigation for the city of Jackson. The two most critical items that we're looking for in this work that we're doing are identifying the National Economic Development Plan, as well as completing the environmental compliance, all environmental compliance activities. And so when we talk about the National Economic Development Plan, what is that? That is the plan that provides the greatest benefit, the greatest benefit to meet our national economic growth priorities. And so, all plans will then be assessed against what is identified as the National Economic Development Plan. And, if we have any questions on that, we can go into a little bit more depth on the National Economic Development Plan. But that's going to be the baseline. And so that is going to provide the expected flood risk management that we need up in Jackson. And all alternatives must meet at least that, if not more. And so that's why the NED becomes that baseline that we look at. We're also going to be providing an analysis of comprehensive benefits. So comprehensive benefits, both quantitative, those that we can measure, either be it economically, amount of water passed through the system, levels of gauges up and downstream. And I remember from this morning there were some concerns about the flash flooding that occurs on the Pearl during high water events. And so we're going to look deeper into that in our modeling and in our analysis. We're also going to be taking a look at qualitative. So things that aren't necessarily measured in numbers, but other benefits that are not traditionally measured, but definitely need to be considered in the overall in the overall analysis of a project and whether it should or should not be built. And so the last thing I want to leave folks with in my remarks at this point is to remember that the Corps of Engineers, we're neither a proponent or an opponent of any one project. What we want to do is we want to get the engineering right. And we appreciate your input into helping us identify what is that best flood risk management solution for the city of Jackson and the Pearl River Basin. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Leslie to go into the technical details of where we're at in the project right now.
Thank you. Leslie Burkoska, Regional Planning. So the non-federal interest report that was submitted, it built upon the historical studies, assessing over 60 different flood risk reduction features. At the conclusion of the report, 3 plans were identified for further assessment: a non-structural plan, a levee plan, and a channel improvement plan. The non-structural plan consisted of relocating structures and buying the land upon which the structures were located. The levee plan included upgrading existing levees, construction of additional levee segments and/or flood walls in unprotected areas, and the addition of pumps or gated structures. The channel improvement plan, which was the non-federal interest Rankin-Hines locally preferred plan in their report, consisted of excavation to increase the channel capacity, demolition of the existing weir that's near the JH Fill water treatment plant, construction of a new weir with low flow gate and fish passage structure further downstream. It proposed the location and placement of excavated material, upgrading of an existing non-federal levee into a federal ring levee around the Savannah Street wastewater treatment plant as well. So those are the three final array plans that were submitted. Next slide. So now, since that report submittal, the Corps of Engineers and Rankin-Hines are working collaboratively on a report that will provide comparison of flood risk management levels. The Corps of Engineers is going to be lead author preparing the draft environmental impact statement to identify the National Economic Development Plan as discussed. It will compare the level of flood protection provided by that plan to the level of flood protection provided by all the alternatives being assessed. Additionally, the report is going to include the downstream assessment of potential impacts on the Pearl River Basin. The comparison of plans will include the non-federal interest Section 211 final plans in the report they're submitted, as well as additional plans. A revised non-structural plan is currently being worked on and assessed. We're looking for feedback on that. Right now, we're preliminarily looking at items maybe such as structural elevation and floodproofing of structures, as well as a plan that could be a combination or hybrid of the channel improvement plan and non-structural, and it could be other plans and alternatives that are included in this report. This report will not make a recommendation, again, rather it will provide a comparison of alternatives so that the Assistant Secretary of Army for Civil Works may make the decision on a range of flood risk management options. Next slide. So the Pearl River Basin is large, over 8,000 square miles, but our study area is focused on providing benefits, the flood risk reduction benefits on the area between River Mile 270, which is just south of Richland, Mississippi, and then going north up to River Mile 302 at the Ross Barnett Reservoir Dam. The study area encompasses portions of Hinds and Rankin counties in Mississippi. And when we say that in the study area, downstream impacts or potential for impacts are definitely going to be considered and evaluated. Next slide. Areas of interest, also known as comprehensive benefits. Several have been identified, as you can see on the slide. We're looking for public feedback regarding other areas that aren't identified on the slide, as well as feedback on the areas that have been identified. So if you see something up there that's not presented, please provide that comment so we can get that and include it in our evaluations and for consideration. But the ones that have been identified in addition to flood risk reduction priority, right now it would be water supply, water and wastewater treatment, ecosystem and environmental impacts, existing waste sites, cultural resources, transportation, downstream impacts, recreational access and opportunities, community impacts, and economic opportunities. Now I'll hand it over back to Colonel Klein.
All right, thanks, Leslie. We go to the next slide. That's our timeline. This is where we are today. The technical team is continuing to do their work, and it's really critical that we execute now these sessions with you so that we can receive your feedback, your considerations, and even from session 1, we've already received things. I've got a checklist going of things that I've got to go back to the team and make sure, hey, we are doing this, right? We are doing this, right? And your feedback is critically important. But at the end of August, we will have a draft report complete. In September, that will go out for review as well in order to inform the final report, which will be submitted at the end of December for the Secretary to make a decision in January. This is a very streamlined timeline, but what I want to reiterate as well, it's feasible, and that's because we're working off of a lot of years of great work that has been done up to this point. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, and we look forward to hearing your feedback.
All right, thank you, panel. So, as I mentioned earlier, there are multiple ways that you can provide your feedback and your input. And we're going to leave this slide up. We're going to have a questions session where you can come up and make your comments. But we'll leave this slide up that gives you several of the ways that you can provide your input. Of course, don't forget there are comment cards out in the foyer. There's also, and if I didn't mention this, there is a study map out there where you can put a push pin in that would represent where you're from, your residence or your area of concern, and we would appreciate that feedback as well. So, as we mentioned earlier, we've got 2 microphones down here in the aisles. The people that are online as part of the WebEx, we would ask that they please provide information in the chat. If you have a question and would like to have that question presented before the panel, that's one way to do that. There will be a record of that chat, and that will become part of the public record, as will your questions and the responses. We have a court reporter up here, and she's taking those down, as well as we have the video rolling to go along with it. So at this time, Scott, could you bring the house lights up for us? And if you will, please wait until you're recognized so that we don't talk on top of each other. So if you have questions, you please make your way to the microphones, and we'll get started. I would reiterate, though, because we do have a virtual audience, and because there are some people that may not be able to hear you, particularly if you're pointed this way and they're at the back of the room, please use mic if you have a question. So with that, the lights are coming up, and make your way to the microphones if you would like. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Brad Pellett, and I'm born and raised in Slidell. My family's been here forever. Actually graduated here, and my other family members. I own land on Porter's Island. I know many people who live in the flooded areas. My brother lives in River Gardens. He's right at the corner of Magnolia. That is the lowest point in River Gardens. And there's like 6 months out of the year, he can't even drive his vehicle to his house. He's got to park down the road and walk up. I know a lot of people who fish. They do everything on the river. They crawfish, they hunt, everything, almost there. And there's a lot of livelihood that comes from the river. I'm sorry if I had a stroke, and it's kind of messed up my thought process.
No hurry.
Take your time.
I lived in Pekin for a while, and I was there when they had that war over the Wilson Slough. Was that on the Corps Engineer project to do that? You could go to Walkeye and go to the river, the real Pearl River, not the big West Pearl, and there were weeds 6 feet tall, and you could walk across dry land over to Louisiana. It was a slough that was built to divert the water from the Pearl River over to the other areas, to the West Pearl and stuff. And I don't understand why they did that. Because the Pearl River actually comes down over by Stennis. That's the Pearl. And what we call now the Pearl is the West Pearl. And then it breaks down into the east and middle, you know, as it goes into the marshes and the swamp. Y'all don't know anything about the Wilson Slough?
No, so I personally do not. But
We'll have to investigate.
Because it seemed like that would be an option to block that back off and divert the water back where it's supposed to go. Another thing that I get from so many things that I hear is, why is Jackson more important than the people farther down the river? This is all about Jackson, right? Jackson flooding, what about us?
Do you want me to tell you where we're coming from? Are you finished? I can respond if you'd like.
No, why is the focus being on Jackson's flood?
So if I may, so this is one really important point, is that the Corps has to respond to the direction we're given from Congress. So the direction was to study the flooding problems in Pearl. It doesn't mean the rest of any other part of the country is unimportant. It's just we're responding to that direction from Congress. And so that direction, as we outlined earlier, has continued over time to encompass making sure we're taking care of downstream interests, perhaps in direct response to all of you and others, to make sure if we can solve the flooding in Pearl, it doesn't cause additional challenges for your area. And that's absolutely part of this analysis, is not inducing something else somewhere else.
I'm just wondering what Jackson did or what Mississippi did to where they're getting more focus than we are. This river's been needing dredging. You can ride down the river and you hit bottom with your boat. Your motor hits on the bottom. And sometimes it gets low enough where you could get hurt. And it needs dredging. We all know that. It's been wanted for years and years. Just dredging would help with the flood down here. Dredging the river.
Thank you for that. We
All right.
heard a little bit of that earlier as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you so much. Sir?
Thank you. I definitely agree with everything this gentleman just said. My name is Darren Stever, and just to give you a little bit of my background, paramedic for 27 years. I'm now safety manager for an aerospace company, and I live in Lower Slidell, very close to the Mississippi line. I am not a water expert whatsoever. However, I am colleagues with a very awesome water expert. He does water rescues that is just amazing. And I've been in contact with him about this meeting tonight, and he couldn't be here. So I would like to share his thoughts and his questions with this committee today. This is from my colleague, and as well as the chief of the Pine Grove Fire Department. And this is what they would like to have asked. In 2006, the Army Corps of Engineers completed construction of the Wilson Slough off Parkside Drive between St. Tammany Parish and Pearl River County, Mississippi. Then they never returned. It never properly drained the way as promoted by the Army Corps of Engineers then, was neglected and ignored. Because of that neglect and the failure of the Army Corps of Engineers, no disrespect please, to fix or at least maintain what they built to start with, the erosion is destroying the ecosystem of St. Tammany Parish. And as it stands right now, the water gets so low in summer, you can drive a truck straight down the bed of the river. What is the plan, if any, to restore any water flow back into the river channel past Wilson Slough? And is the Army Corps of Engineers even concerned about the potential environmental impacts that the failure of the weir is and will be in the future without immediate repair? It would appear that the Army Corps of Engineers is completely avoiding the area, which is experiencing the greatest impact of decreased water flow, to hold a meeting in Slidell. Can you speak to that?
So, thank you. Again, appreciate the feedback. Please pass that on to them as well. It's, Absolutely fantastic feedback. So what has happened with all projects on the Lower Pearl, and we started addressing this earlier, with the aging infrastructure we have, is they've gone to caretaker status. Okay, and caretaker status is probably the lowest level of funding. I'm not saying it's great. Okay, and go ahead. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to take that criticism so that I can take it back to our leadership as well and say we need the appropriate funding so that we can do caretaker status right, to maintain these properly over time. Because to your testimony, sir, to their testimony, they're not performing as designed, right?
Exactly.
And so now I think what we have to do as a nation, right, as our and as our elected officials, and even us as the Corps, is go back with this feedback and let them know that hey, things that we did are not performing, as they're supposed to, and ask that question of, what are we going to do about it, right? And one of the solutions could be, I'm sorry, now I get a little more, sir, could be, hey, let's close the thing back off, right, and redivert the water back to where it should be, right? That could be one solution. In fact, we've now got that in the record, something we can certainly take back. Or if the decision is going to be that, hey, we're going to maintain these things for the original intended purpose that we put them in for, then I go back and express capability and say, please fund me to the level it's going to take to do that, right? Because to some testimony earlier, in some cases, because of the low funding that we have, caretaker status has created hazards. Okay, and as water safety rescue folks, fire folks, they're the ones that get called. Yes. To go and do the responses to these. I've got a great appreciation for that and understand it. And so, sir, I appreciate that testimony, and we'll, go back, express our capability and your concerns to my leadership, as well as everyone else we talk to.
I appreciate that, and I'm sure a lot of the first responders would definitely take it back to your leadership, and let's just hope for the best for everyone.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
sir. My name is Gregory Dagpont. I own land on a navigational canal, and I think this really is all about Jackson because they had a bad water problem a few months ago. It was all over the news, and I'm sure if we can help out Jackson, that'd be great. And it seemed like the Pearl River been very high the last 4 or 5 months. It's been a lot more water than normal as it has been coming down. They can just hold the water and use it for good use. That would be great. But it'd be nice if they could keep an easy medium, so to speak. Because we ski between Lock 1 and Lock 2, and it'd be nice to keep that water level at a certain medium so that, we don't want the dam to break up in Lock 2 or the lock to break and flood everything. Even though they had the assessments comes all the way up way out the bank, and that the Corps could really access anytime they want to, but hopefully it doesn't get to that. But main thing is, a while back they had a dumping over in Bogalusa, that paper mill. They dumped something and killed a bunch of fish. That they could just restrict the dumping in the river and keep the water fresh, and back to keeping the water level at an easy medium for it not to get too low or control for it not to get too high where people could make it to their houses and such, and for it not to get too low for it to get overfished real easy. And that's my concern, is those three things right there.
So we heard some similar concerns about this earlier today, so I really appreciate you amplifying some of that. Hadn't heard about the dumping and the killed fish, so that was definitely new information. I'm sure folks around here may be more privy to that. So we want to make sure that we're making best use of that infrastructure that exists, and that we're making it for its original purpose, and we're not implicating other problems as a result of that. And some of the things you highlighted here, we need to make sure we look at.
And there's one other thing. Above Lock 2, there was 2 drownings up there because it's the way the water flows over some dam. I haven't even been up there, but they could take a look at that and do something with that. It was several drownings over the years, but recently it was 2 drownings lately. it's just another problem up there.
Yes, sir, thanks for that. And we are aware of those, have expressed that concern back to our leadership so we can find some mitigation solution to prevent future drownings there. That's one piece. Two, thank you for the information on the chemical spill. I was a child that grew up downstream from Union Carbide, and I remember the fish kill on the small stream behind my house.
Yeah,
So I can only imagine.
Yeah, I think it was in 2008 when it happened.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yes, sir, I believe you're next.
My name is Stanford Owen. I live at 117 Shermack Drive in Slidell. I'm a commissioner in the St. Tammany Parish Levee Drainage and Conservation District. And I represent that district's eastern edge, which is all along the Pearl River, all the way up to Mississippi. I've been living in the same location since 1979. I remember the 79 flood, the 80 flood, the 83 flood, the 96 flood, and Katrina flood. The last slide that you had up there, you had 13 impact points that y'all were looking at. One of them was downstream effects. Do you have any information, data, presentation, water flow data on the downstream effects, specifically as it affects the Pearl River Wildlife Management Area marsh, the Biloxi Wildlife Management Area marsh, Bayou Sauvage Wildlife Management Area marsh, and the Big Branch marsh. All of those marshes are critical marshes relative to storm surge protection. What you did, I worked with Army Corps from Vicksburg from 1984 to 1992 on the projects that they were working for mitigating flood in Slidell. I remember a large amount of what they did was look at not only the effects of flooding in the Slidell area, but the effect of water flow into the marsh. I haven't seen any of that with this. That will directly impact tens of thousands of homes relative to storm surge. So if it's a big negative, we need to know that, and we need to know some data relative to that. There are other issues relative to environmental concerns that quite honestly, if that information isn't forthcoming, those are pretty mundane and moot.
So, yes, sir, thanks for that. So for the downstream analysis, it's currently ongoing. Yes, it will be released and available. I can't speak to each of the specific wildlife management areas. And also, to tie into that, we're also assessing those environmental impacts. So we'll be working really closely with all the Fish and Game's environmental folks.
So when in the decision making to launch this project and actually do this project, you're having these hearings, then you give us that information, and that's it? Do we have more hearings? Is there any other impact after that, or is that a done deal?
So a couple things, so we're going to tag team on this. So the Corps is doing a report to support secretarial determination. It will include National Environmental Policy Act processes, right? So the draft report's in September, out for public comment. We will produce a final report. We have a NEPA document. It's encompassed in all that environmental impact statement. So it's all, we can come back and walk through the eaches, but we're starting with the early engagement. We're going to determine how to do more engagement along the way between now and September. And try and, as we're coming through that, make sure we're building the information and getting folks. You guys are going to talk to folks. Others are going to want to come in. We're going to want to make sure we're learning so that we don't deliver something that's incomplete.
So I want to clarify what you just said.
Yes.
So between now and September,
Yes.
we're going to have all the environmental reports, plus meetings to feedback on that, and then you'll make a decision?
No, the September is a draft report.
Draft.
Do you want to put that slide up with the schedule? Can somebody do that? Can you see it? It's hard to see with the light, right? So September 1 is the draft report, right? And the public will have an opportunity to comment. And in December, we're going to produce a final based on the public comment to include all of you, others, the resource agencies, state officials, all those things.
And again, to clarify, the project you're proposing is a single project. You don't have multiple options within this
We will have
project.
multiple options. The legislation requires, and I'm glad you asked this, the legislation requires this National Economic Development Plan, which is a very wonky term. And then we have this non-federal interest plan that was submitted by Rankin Hines. And then there was this combination thereof that Leslie referenced. All those alternatives that are out there that have been looked at in some portion thereof, or other ideas people have suggested, we're going to encompass in that, how would that fit into the combination thereof?
I'd just like to make a point for the record that all of those marshes are mostly dependent on Pearl River water for survival, not the Mississippi River at all,
Okay.
and very little from Lake Pontchartrain. So the Pearl River is the survival mode for those marshes, which are not just important for storm surge, but for wildlife and fisheries and et cetera.
Of course.
Okay?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Thank you very much. I'm Sharon Hewitt. I'm the state senator in this area. And so first of all, I want to start by saying thank you all for being here. You know, we very much appreciate that. It's an important issue in our area. And I appreciate the fact that you're in Slidell, which is the area where we're most affected, having this public hearing. And thank you for the people that are here in the audience. And I wasn't here at the afternoon meeting, but I do appreciate the people that are here to learn more about the project and to express your concerns about it, because that is the only way, right, that we're going to make an impact on this project. This project, as you talked about in your presentation, has been under consideration for some time. We formed a Lower Pearl River Basin Task Force through the legislature in the state capitol, and the mission of that has evolved a little bit over time. It's currently configured to include all the relevant state agencies that have anything to do with managing water and rivers. So our task force has representation from the Department of Natural Resources, Wildlife and Fisheries, the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, which is our coastal zone management program, the Department of Environmental Quality, representation from the legislature, as well as Washington and St. Tammany parishes. And in 2018, when we had our last opportunity for public comment, we prepared a very well-documented response on behalf of the state of Louisiana to that draft EIS. And I'm going to read maybe just a couple of highlights of that, and I'm going to officially submit that again into the public record to make sure that you all have that, because we had all the technical work done by all of our experts at the state level in addressing the proposal as it was presented at that time. You know, one of our big concerns has always been how the project area has been defined. It's defined, as you said, Hines and Rankin counties, without really looking at the whole river as a system all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And having that, you know, the impact of the downstream areas added to the WRDA bill in 2018 was work that we did, the people in this room, along with, you know, legislative leadership and working with our congressional delegation to make sure that it wasn't just about Rankin and Hines County, but it's also all of the parishes here in Louisiana along the river that are affected and the people who live here. And so one of my questions is, you know, yes, you have said a couple of times that you're going to be looking at the downstream impacts, but I'd like to better understand how that kind of factors into the decision. You know, is this something where you're going to look at the cost-benefit analysis in the project area, and the downstream is kind of like a footnote on the downstream? How? Because we're not going to have any benefits on the downstream end. There are no benefits to this project to us that I can see. You know, it's really just, we're going to get the consequences of it, and how are those factored into the overall decision when you're looking at flood control projects for the Jackson area?
Thank you.
So thank you for your continued involvement in this effort in the basin and so eloquently putting those things forward. So a couple things. First of all, are we aware of your comments and all the things out there? Yes. Have I personally read them? No, but I know that the district is, and we will be looking at that entire record of prior documents, prior comments, how those things were thought through in today's world, and what we additionally get, right? Because things could have changed and emerged since 2018, which
Sure.
only seems like yesterday. So want full confidence that we are going to do that, but please submit to make sure we didn't miss something. And that's always the way it should be, right? You know how that is. I also appreciate you making sure that you've highlighted this task force for us and how they actually played in getting the 2018 language, because sometimes we don't know the backstory of how language comes to be, and that speaks volumes to this. But to the more fundamental point about downstream impacts, I mean, fundamentally as an agency, investing in solving a problem in one community should not implicate problems in another community that we fully understand, right? And so, yeah, we're not looking to implicate any kind of flooding, environmental damage downstream to benefit one community and then cause a problem in another, right? And so, benefit costs, we're going to be doing benefit cost analysis on these various alternatives. And on some level, it depends upon what data we have, how we describe those benefits, whether it's quantified, monetized, or simply described in basic terms. I mean, even just talking about impacts to wetlands and the number of acres is a significant, important way. And the gentleman who talked about how the water from Pearl provides the water to those refugee wetlands is a good example. You don't need to quantify that as much as you need to understand it. So all those things are going to be presented in a very complete way, and if there are places we have weaknesses, we want to know about them, and we want to make sure that they are presented to my boss as a decision among the alternatives that are out there. And so pros, cons, yes, benefits, costs, but also potential implications of other unintended consequences.
Okay, and I appreciate that answer. So for those in the room, we will be working on then, as we see the plan in September, we will be working through the Lower Pearl River Basin Task Force, again, to develop a consolidated response from all of our, executive branch agencies to try to help address what we still see as benefits, perhaps, are concerns that we may have. I want to just highlight, and I'm not going to read all this, but there were a handful of kind of big bullets that came out of the work that we did in 2018. At that time, again, with the project as it was proposed, we felt like there was little consideration given to the potential impacts to the water quantity and the water quality of the Lower Pearl River Basin. So I'm not very good at this.
No worries.
We also believed that the construction and the operation of the proposed project could have a reasonably foreseeable effect on coastal land use, water use, and natural resources in the Louisiana coastal zone. Hence, we believe that a consistency determination was necessary pursuant to the Coastal Zone Management Act of 1972. Third, we were concerned about, during the project construction, the water quality, quantity, and sediment issues in the Lower Pearl River. Fourth, we were interested in consideration of downstream mitigation projects and looking at, again, weirs and sill removals and things like that that should be considered as part of the overall game plan. There was certainly a lot of talk about endangered species and protection of rare and threatened species such as the Gulf sturgeon and the inflated heel splitter. And we have about 47 different species of animals that are of concern in the Lower Pearl River watershed. There's the issue of hazardous waste sites, and we're concerned about how those are going to affect the water quality for us here downstream. And then just finally, the impact of potential population growth and future development along the shoreline of the new reservoir, we call it the One Lake Project around here, and how that is going to affect us again downstream. So those were kind of the high level, themes of our concerns in the past. And we'll probably refresh some of that when we see the new report. But don't forget about us here. And again, I know I'm talking to a table full of engineers. You have to look at the river as a whole system. and not just in isolation. And, we are going to be impacted downriver with whatever is done upriver. And we very much care, as the gentleman said. We're just as important in Slidell, Louisiana as they are in Jackson, Mississippi. And we're going to continue to work with our congressional delegation and hopefully continue to work with you all in providing feedback and input and constructive suggestions. Thank you very much.
Really appreciate that, ma'am, on so many levels. Really, at the end of the day, it's about community resilience, right? Community resilience has broad implications, and that's something my boss would certainly say here. And so we want to be engaged in that conversation. We want to answer questions as they emerge. We want to start with where we were and inform the path forward. And so really look forward to doing that with you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. My name is Andrew Whitehurst. I'm the Water Program Director for Gulf Restoration Network, or Healthy Gulf. And I'd like to thank the Corps and Army Secretary's staff. This is the first time in 10 years that people have been invited to speak from a microphone at one of these types of meetings. Meetings have been orchestrated, but not allowing open public comments so we could be heard by our peers and we could learn from them. So thank you for that. And I'd also like to thank Andrea Walker on the Army Secretary's staff for being a great source of information. Thank you, Ms. Walker.
Wait. There you go.
The Army Secretary's office and the Vicksburg Corps District are asking people here on the lower end of the Pearl to help the Corps fill in the gaps, as we heard from Mr. Shaw, on the work they're doing since they took over the writing of this draft environmental impact statement for this federal flood risk management project. So we're being asked for the full scope of issues, you call them areas of interest, that need to be addressed in the draft document being prepared for publication by September 1st. And that's my understanding, that this is a scoping meeting, a re-scoping as part of the NEPA process, and that's how I'm going to treat it. The Army Secretary's office has had access to 2 extensive reviews of the gaps, if that's what you're looking for, and the weaknesses of the 2018 draft EIS. One was done by the Army's own nationwide team of reviewers, and one was done by Battelle Institute, a large engineering firm and defense contractor. The Army Secretary's office has access to all the comments from 2018 and knows the lake plan, or whatever you call it, the channel modification plan, was not well accepted. Yet it seems that the Army Secretary, in your NOI, your Notice of Intent for this meeting, is describing and advancing 4 alternatives, and 2 of them involve the lake, Alternative C, and Alternative A1. In 2018, the lake dredging project was one of 3 alternatives, plus a no action. I didn't imagine that after finishing agency technical review last July that the Army Secretary's office would repackage the Rankin-Hines Drainage District's work and offer the lake dredging plan in 2 of its 4 alternatives. That's a surprise. And I don't know what the combination of all of the above is going to be, and I don't know what's contemplated by other alternatives. I hope there'll be another agency technical review. On slide number 8, which is titled USACE or USACE activities, there's one leg of analysis that's not on there, and I'd like that to be on for tomorrow night's meeting in Jackson. You say that the project has to be environmentally acceptable, technically feasible, but the language in the 2018 Word as section 1176 also added economically justified. So that's 3 legs of analysis, and it should be on your slide. If you're going to do the economic analysis, please put it up there. And this is a long river. It doesn't belong to Jackson. As you've heard from speakers tonight, and there are a lot of economic issues all the way down the river, starting with the discharge permits that cities have to have and that paper mills have and have to meet for the Clean Water Act. Those are economic issues. There's the fishing. the ability to access the river in small boats safely. The seafood industry that's dependent on the marshes and estuaries is an economic issue. So that economic analysis needs to be on slide number 8, and I'd like to know more about how you're going to tackle it, because that was part of the language that Senator Cassidy and Representative Scalise put in the WRDA in 2018 to protect the lower Pearl in Mississippi and all the way to the mouth at Lake Bourne. Some of the scoping issues, if you're looking for scoping issues, are here. The study area for the project should go all the way to Lake Bourne, not be truncated at Hinds and Rankin counties. An unsteady three-dimensional model should be used for the Pearl River. That's been suggested to you by the engineering department of this parish. A water budget for the river needs to be developed and presented so we know the true picture of water inputs, water use, and evaporation. The Pearl River is falling below its 7Q10 minimum flow marks for a significant percentage of days when the record is examined post-Barnett Reservoir construction in 1963. What will another source of evaporation mean to that falling short of minimum flows? What are the effects of a warming climate on the Pearl River? This was all but ignored in the 2018 DEIS. Can the Ross Barnett Reservoir be used more aggressively to store and release water to manage rains in its watershed? Are the present minimum flows released from the Ross Barnett adequate for the lower river's needs in the dry months of July to October? I'll stop there, but there are more, and I know that people need to be thinking along the lines of what else should these scoping factors hold. And I hope you get some more of that tonight. I appreciate the ability to make comments at all and to speak in particular. It's a nice change.
Thank you, Andy. Just a couple of things I just want to make sure I respond to. First of all, I really appreciate your comprehensive thoughts there, and please make sure you're submitting. I'm not sure you're planning on doing that, but want to make sure we get them all captured, and that applies to everybody, of course. Couple things. One, in terms of peer reviews and prior reviews, on some level, the current analysis is in response to that, right? We have current direction, so I want to clear up the direction. Why under 3104? Because that's the direction where the secretary can make a decision. It also references two alternatives, right? The NED plan and the non-federal interest plan, otherwise known as the locally preferred plan, or a combination thereof. So we're not inhibiting or biased in any way to a solution. We're being very directly responsive to that legislation, but can encompass other ideas and alternatives. And many of you have suggested some here. We heard some earlier. We've heard some others from letters and such, whatnot. So open to those ideas for certain. We are not biased here. In terms of economic analysis, yes, we are doing the economic analysis. We just may have worded it strangely here. Often when we talk about technical feasibility, encompasses benefit cost analysis. So we will certainly clean up that language a bit, not a problem. Also appreciate some of your cues. One of them gets at Ross Barnett, so I just want to be clear about this. It is not a federal facility. We are modeling it as it's supposed to be currently operated. In the last session, this was also suggested, can they operate it differently? I think that's a policy matter for the people who own that, and certainly we can talk to whether that would have offer any opportunity given where it lies. Whether that we can implicate that in a decision Mr. Conner makes is a whole another thing. But for the good of the public and transparency, certainly we can talk to what it does, how it's operated, what its mandate is, and it is not mandated with flood risk management. Don't know anything about whether they'd be willing to entertain that, but we should certainly talk about it for sure. And I think another gentleman and I talked about that a bit earlier. So happy to take all that on, can talk to other things when you want to.
I would like to add on the A1 alternative for non-structural. The non-structural will be non-structural only plan. It would not have structural components such as a weir, ponding behind the weir.
A1, when I read it in the NOI, looked like it would be the lake plan, build the lake, and then decide if you have to do other non-structural projects if you have flooding after the lake's built. That's the way I read it. So you have C, which is the lake dredging plan, A, which is non-structural, floodplain buyouts, relocations, floodproofing, A1, which is a combination of C, the lake, and non-structural after the lake's built, and then the combination of all the above. And I don't know what that looks like or how it's imagined, but if I'm wrong about A1, let me know. But I heard it described twice today, and it seems like it involves the lake dredging or the channel modification, as well as some additional non-structural.
So the team's plan and strategy right now is to assess a non-structural only plan without structural. That will be one of the plans that's being assessed. So it would not have the lake, the weir, the impounding, movement to the weir included into one of the plans. It would just be non-structural. What that non-structural looks like though is what we're looking for feedback on. It could be elevation of structures, floodproofing of structures. It can be a combination of that. It's things that don't change the hydrology, but that get things to reduce the flood risk to the individual structure. Sometimes it includes recommendations for flood management plan updates, flood warning systems, but not structural things like a weir. So there will be a plan for non-structural only.
So thanks for that, this is great. So this is a good example of where we get wonky as an agency. And it depends on where you sit on these terms. So even if you look at the alternatives under evaluation slide, A is relocating structures, buyout and relocation. These are all considered non-structural. But A1 is additional measures to include elevation and floodproofing. So it's really adding additional, what most folks would call non-structural measures. And so people define those measures differently. We will clean up the language so it's abundantly clear.
Before it comes out in another form like the notice of intent, it needs to be clearer.
Appreciate it.
Capable of being read a number of ways. So I mean, if you want to list 4 alternatives, list them and be very tight with them. But the way it's written in NOI is,
Absolutely appreciate the feedback. Like I said, this is a wonky area, so I get exactly what you're saying. So thank you for that.
Hi, I'm Margie Vicknair-Prey. I'm with the Delta Chapter Sierra Club, which is the state of Louisiana. Everything that Andrew said, we definitely reiterate and are worried about and interested in. And I'm very glad to see Senator Hewitt also here to express the same feelings that we had about the One Lake project when it was named that. We are very concerned, obviously, about the people because a lot of people use the Pearl for recreational fishing and oystering down near the mouth of it, and all of that could be affected by reducing the flow. I'm sure y'all are aware of it, but the Pearl River has been named one of America's top 3 endangered rivers in the United States. So, and it's number 3 out of all the rivers in the country. And dams and weirs are the main reason for it being endangered and slowing the flow. And anything that slows the flow reduces the amount of water coming through the river and through the system. And because of reduced flow, we get dissolved oxygen problems. We have siltation problems. And again, that affects everyone down. And we also have coliform bacteria problems. I have done tests myself of the river, the Pearl River, in a couple of locations in the Louisiana area, from Pearlington up to around the Bogachita. And the numbers of coliform bacteria are just astonishing and scary. And when you reduce the water flow coming down the river, that means those numbers are going to be an even higher percentage in the water. And in the summer, when the water flows are less, is when people are using the river more, and kids are swimming and things like that. So anything that reduces the water coming down the river is a negative as far as we're concerned. And of course, we're also worried about the endangered species, things like the Gulf sturgeon and the paddlefish, which need at least fairly clean water to survive, and the Gulf sturgeon to lay its eggs. People don't realize that it's like the salmon, where it comes up the rivers and lays its eggs, and the babies grow up in the river. The reason we're losing them is because the river, and especially the Pearl, is one of the ones that was a major river nursery for the sturgeon. And it's not able to get to its egg-laying grounds. and a lot of it had been silted over, and then the level of the water is so low that the fish can't get upstream. So we are definitely against anything that would reduce the amount of water coming down through this area. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Melinda White, Representative District 75, which is Washington Parish, a little St. Tammany. And the river is the border of my district. It's not only that, but it's part of our life. It's part of our family. It's part of our community. And it's a large basin that is a part of our state and a part of the United States for that matter. What concerns me right now, and I came in a little late, so I apologize for that, but did I see that you're not including this area in the environmental impact study?
No, we're including the area.
Because the footprint that I saw, and I think I took a picture of it, did not include us.
So when we identify a study area, that is not talking about the hydraulic connectivity area. So the watershed in its entirety is hydraulically connected. So all of that will be assessed. We want to make sure that we're not transferring risk to other places, whether that transfer risk is flood risk, environmental impacts. So that is being studied. The study area is the area that we focus on for flood risk reduction benefits. That is the primary area that is targeted for a project to get the flood risk reduction. So that's what we mean by study area. It's the area that focuses on to achieve the flood risk reduction benefits, provide protection, some type of level of flood protection for the community there. Does not mean that the hydraulic connectivity anywhere else is limited. Anything that's connected is going to be evaluated for different flood sources to make sure there's no transferred risk, there's nothing being impacted, or what those impacts are.
Well, we've been waiting for that environmental impact study to get to us so that we can validate our concerns. And we've been working on this a while with Andrew, with Senator Hewitt in the study, and it's just very hard for us to go along with what seems to be, we're sorry about what's happening in Jackson. We want relief for the folks that are flooding, but we don't want it to cost all the rest of us down the river with multiple issues, and lack of water flow in this area is a problem. As much as I'd like to say it's a scenic river, it's a working river, so it has a lot of industry, a lot of municipalities that depend on it, and I guess our concern there would be that we're not impacted any further than we already are with all of the man-made projects that are currently on the river, that we see 50, 60, 70 years later, the problems that we have, for instance, on the seals that we have on the Bogachita and on the Pearl, for a Pearl River navigational canal system that I'm sure that many years ago seemed like a great idea. It's not a great idea. It was not ever used for the purpose that it was established many years ago. So it becomes real disheartening for us that we're dealing with things that were built many years ago, and we're talking about building more on that river. So when we look at the alternatives for what we can do to eliminate or downsize the issues of the flooding in Jackson, we don't need to think in terms of putting more man-made projects on that river that are going to impact everyone below it, including our Mississippi neighbors below that. So I've taken trips to DC with them. They're also objecting to this. They are feeling the impacts of the structures that we already have on the river. And it sends a lot of wrong messages down this way when we are not receiving that economic or environmental impact on what this is going to cause and cost us, and if it's really a good idea or not. We would like to make sure that our voices are heard and that we actually see a result for that. And I guess that would be my main concern.
Yeah, thanks, ma'am. I completely hear you, right? So a couple things. First of all, I think since 2018, there was a report produced that did not get released to the public. I don't think I ever saw the Secretary's office either. But what we were responding to is that it was basically effectively paused, right? So there has been paused release of information, and now we have an update needed of that information that was not released. So understand the need for transparency and visibility, and we're absolutely about that. And that's why we're holding the sessions, to let folks know what we're about to launch into without preconceived notions of where we land. So we have to be responsive to our direction from Congress. The big change here, though, was that there was monies allocated in the bipartisan infrastructure law to solve a flood risk management problem in Pearl, to the extent it's achievable, right? And so there is no pre-decision, including a potential analysis. Our analysis will include no action. So it is complete in that sense, and you will be part of seeing all of that. We want to make sure we're hearing those ideas, appreciate everything you expressed. And some of the communities I suspect you're actually even talking about are communities we heard from in a variety of sources already, and a variety perhaps through some of you. And that's actually one of the reasons the non-structural was put out there as, we believe it's probably the ND plan, because we know some of these other plans that in the past didn't pass the benefit cost test. And there has been an overarching interest in relocations and buyouts, which would largely happen on a voluntary basis. But we need to put it out there so people can digest it and see if that's what they want. Right, so we're definitely all in on that. Did I miss something there? Thank you.
And thank you for allowing us to be able to speak in a public manner and me being here. We appreciate that.
Sir? How y'all doing? My name's Hunter Sessions, and I got some questions about right now, not so much about this, what's going on here. Who decides when the Ross Barnett is opened?
So the Ross Barnett is managed by a non-federal entity. So that's a local, Craig, what is it?
It's the Pearl River Valley Waterway Commission.
All right. And what parameters do they use to tell them when it's time to open it up?
So they've got a water control manual that they use to inform that.
Do they look at anything downriver at the time, like the water levels or the tide or anything?
That question's probably best for that private entity.
Yeah. All right. What about
if I control the water manual, I can tell you. Sorry.
That's a big thing about all this too, because it's happening now. When you put something else on top of it, they're not seeing what's going on pretty much.
We do model it based on their manual.
We do.
So we model it that they operated as they are supposed to operate.
And how accurate are the monitors, the level of water as we speak? How accurate are they? Like the water heights, like in different areas?
Are you talking about for the model that we're using right now?
Not right now, just today, when you pull up on your phone, like the level of Pearl River at Pearl River or Burlington or anywhere, how accurate are those?
Yeah, our USGS, the USGS pages that you go to that we publish on our website. Unless you correct me if I'm wrong, they are probably within hundredths. 0.01.
I think we need to check those out again. I know they're putting new ones up. I see new ones coming up every now and then. I actually work on the river, but I don't think they're as accurate as most people think they are. Because MSU is doing a study right now on erosion and the sandbars and stuff, and those girls keep coming down here to do their studies when the river is over the sandbars. And she said that their gauges say that it shouldn't be. So they're wasting a lot of their time and money coming down here to do research, and they're not getting any research done.
So, before you continue, I want to be connected. We want to know about that data, the person you're talking about at MSU.
MSU, doing a study on it. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah, just let us know who it is.
Yeah, all right. I'll get with you. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is Neil Benson, 1174 Yorktown, Slidell. I have some questions regarding this issue. I mean, we've been dealing with this for several years down here. There's been many proposals over the last nearly 2 decades. And our concerns have always been the same. We just don't have enough water. As far as my experience with the river and the swamp, I grew up, of course, out there, but I owned an ecological tour business on the Pearl River for 18 years. And I'm currently in the employ of another tour company, so I'm out there every day. I sold my business to them a couple of years ago. And the effects we see is further saltwater intrusion up the rivers, which thus causes loss of more swamp and life, which holds the ground intact, and thus more erosion. Yeah, we definitely don't have the water flow we used to have now, whether that's due to blockages, sills, other effects from man. All of those need to be studied. But our concerns are really our water level, and a lot of people have brought up tonight, I've listened when they talk of Wilson Slough, and that has to do with the Wakaya Bluff project that was done in the mid-90s, where I believe they were diverting water from the West Pearl to the East Pearl to try to increase water flow to the East Pearl, and basically that had to do with navigation up to the Stennis property at the time, which turned out to be a nightmare. Due to Wakaya Bluff, we've lost the West Middle Pearl, where it feeds off the West Pearl River. We've lost other smaller waterways in the swamp, such as Mills Bayou. But there's so many things that need to be addressed. I know the Mississippi Gulf Coast, your state, is not favorable of this project because their fisheries have suffered for so long. Their fisheries are finally starting to come back. Yet there's still no oyster fishing out there. The reefs have not returned. And it's a fine mix of fresh and salt water in the Pearl River. It definitely affects the Mississippi Sound. And all of those, I believe, need to be addressed as well. It's unfortunate, again, that the Corps has to come in and try to help solve problems that could have been addressed in the early 80s by, the leadership in that area through building requirements and green space. But the flooding apparently persists. And believe me, our hearts break for the people up there in Jackson because we experience it all too well. But we just want to know that everything's being addressed, as far as this project, not just looking at Jackson. And a lot of these studies, I hope, are being done by the Corps, and they're not taking old studies and having effects, that have been proposed by the Pearl River Vision Foundation or entities before them, because this project they've been pushing for a long, long time, and it's been renamed and repackaged many a times, and it's been one lake now for, I don't know what, Andrew, 10 years now. But again, I just wanted to get on the record. I wanted y'all to know our concerns and that they are addressed. But I think Andrew here and Senator Hewitt and Representative White have really made their points as well. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. And if I could, I'm also hearing too, because Ms. Colosimo mentioned earlier too, that status quo, do nothing is an option too, right? That we're considering, and that's not good either, from what I heard from you, because we got saltwater intrusion, right? Coming up the
Well, we definitely have water flow issues when it comes to our water in the basin, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, just from Hurricane Katrina alone, we lost 4 square miles of wetlands in the lower Pearl River Basin. And when you have that kind of loss, of course, it's going to affect many things as far as flood protection for us in this area, saltwater intrusion and so forth. And we just want to know that the Corps is looking at all of these issues.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
A couple of things I've been listening to and not fully understanding is some of the options are weirs, dams. Weirs are deadly, as the other gentleman mentioned. And they're deadly. If you're gonna consider doing weirs in the area, the citizens in that area need to know how deadly they are. I've also heard options of elevations for structures to help with flooding, things like that. What good does it do? My brother's house is 14 feet off the ground. he can't get to his house, he has to use a boat. He can't drive. So elevating or, dams around his house, that ain't helping nobody. Not gonna do anything. Anyway, that's a couple of extra thoughts I had.
Thank you so much, sir.
Any other questions?
Hi, I'm Tony Travis. Thank you for allowing us to speak and for the information. I'm a half-life resident of Washington Parish and a half-life resident of St. Tammany Parish. I currently live on the Pearl River Navigational Canal between Lot 1 and Lot 2. I can't tell you the number of memories I have of this watershed of the Pearl River and the canal. It's just multiple memories of recreation, of skiing, fishing, outdoors. It's a tremendous waterway all along the separation of the Mississippi-Louisiana border. I'm not a hydrologist. I don't understand everything. Can we see the picture of the proposed project? Is that full?
The map?
The map? So we're talking about building.
Sir, we don't have a proposed project. I think it's just the drainage, right?
Just for the lobby.
Oh, just the lobby.
The non-federal.
So this is above the Ross Burnett, right? Below? Oh, okay. So first off, we're having water restrictions from the Ross Burnett. As many people have said, it don't seem like we have enough water in the summertime to navigate the river. You can ask my buddies, they've all gone to jet drives because prop navigation is becoming more and more impossible. The canal does great. Any water flow restriction for the canal would also affect the river because the canal, which was built in the 40s and is non-natural, restricts the flow into the Pearl River. So if they restrict more water from the Ross Burnett down, then there's less water to go down the Pearl River from Bogalusa to Lake Catherine, I guess you would say. So, I don't want to make a big, long speech, but if there's any further restriction of water flow down the Pearl River, I adamantly reject any modification to the current water structure. I do not want the weirs bone at Bogalusa, Bogachita, and Lot 1 due to the recreational value of the Pearl River Navigational Canal. And I also feel that if you cut more water off from Lake Catherine and the saltwater estuaries, then there's going to be that much more demise of our brackish water inhabitants of shrimp, fish, and what have you. So I don't exactly know, and I know, like they were saying, every day we get a gauge reading, and sure, gauge readings range from Bogalusa to Bush to Pearl River, but I know there's been research on what the levels of the water are every day. And, just like, hey, global warming has made the water rise, and global warming has made the temperatures hotter, what has the water flow restrictions from Ross Burnett had as an impact on us? Because I can tell you, the Pearl River has become the Bogachita has become the Leeds Creek, and the Leeds Creek has become a ditch, in my opinion, over the 60 years that I've been around this area. Because I've watched it all change over the years. And so if there's any consideration that there would be a reduction of water flow along the Pearl River, lower Pearl River basin, I reject anything other than what you said a minute ago, the no action or whatever. I hate it, but floods come and go. We deal with them, they deal with them. Was that the 100-year flood for them? Because we've had our 100-year flood as well. If flooding affects you, move away. Eventually New Orleans is coming here. We all know it. It's slowly sinking. And, it seems like we have good water, but then sometimes we don't. And like the gentleman said over there, who's in control of the Ross Burnett, and who says when we're going to get water so that we can navigate our waterway? So I'm against any changes other than the natural or easily obtained changes to the basin and the waterway.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Sir?
One more comment. Mike Zabrowski, 109 Indian Mile Lane. I live down off the West Pearl Launch, about a block back from it. So basically the West Pearl River's in my backyard. It's up over my dock today, and the river's on the fall still. And that river has only been out of my yard for about 3 weeks since November. So in combination with the river gets really dry in the summer, well, it gets really wet from November to now. And we're getting hammered with it. And I know we're picking on the people who control Ross Barnett Reservoir, but we need to take into account this environmental impact study of when hurricanes start to come, and they start coming in on the Pearl River by us, the water starts getting pushed up, and Ross Barnett panics, and they let everything out because it's coming up to them in 3, 4, 5 days. So we're caught in this sweet spot where we got water coming in, and we got an east or south wind pushing in on us, and Pearl River just backs up the whole way up the river. It'll back up to the locks. So I want to make sure when we're looking at these environmental impact studies and we're modeling this stuff, we take into account some of these hurricanes and the amount of water they push in and the amount of water they release at the same time. Because as bad as it is when it's low, it's just as bad when it gets hot. So that was all I had to add.
Thanks, sir.
Sir, Mike's yours.
Good evening. My name's Darren Bourgeois. I live here in Slidell. Just have a couple of questions. Correct me if I'm wrong. In 2020, there were about 2,400 homes, structures that were flooded in Jackson, and in 2022, there were approximately 3,000. You have the initial terms, is that right?
Close.
And what's the cost of this project?
We have to determine the projects, we have to determine the cost, we got to be part of this analysis.
I think it's important that we need to consider the cost versus benefit.
We have to do both.
Just because we have the money doesn't mean we have to spend it unnecessarily.
Completely agree, that's why we said no action. Yep.
Anyone else would like to make a statement? If you prefer not to come up and take the mic, please provide your comments, your input. Like I said, we got an email address. There's comment cards still out there. You can mail us the old-fashioned way to the U.S. Postal Service. Just as a reminder, we have an additional 2 sessions tomorrow in Jackson, Mississippi. And then on the 1st of June, we're going to have 2 virtual sessions as well. Same time, 1 to 6 p.m. Last chance, folks. We want to tell you how much we appreciate you each. You want to take time out of your schedules, out of your time with your family to come provide us your input. It's been very valuable. I'm sure the panel feels the exact same way. Dr. Jeff DeGoyne with Slidell High School in the St. Tammany School District. We're very appreciative of making the facility available to us. So, anything else? Okay.
Thanks everybody for your time, this has been invaluable, can't say that.
Thank you.